you very much, sir.
Thank you for having the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I need a motion on H7.
Move it.
All those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. H20 is on the floor. H20 is a request for approval of resolution number 14-038 of the School Board of Miami-Dade County, Florida, in opposition of Senate Bill 968. I have Ms. Helen Williams to speak. Dr. Feldman is your item, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to frame the issue so that it doesn't get mixed up with anything else. This is not about any organizations. This is strictly about one thing: preventing lives being lost in schools by those that should not have guns in schools. We have one of the best police forces in the state, if not the country, and they are certified officers. They come from the military, some of them come from our schools that have changed their professions. They're trained. They carry data devices that talk about what students they need to be aware of, and they are certified by the state as well as being highly effective in building bridges with our kids. Okay, so we lay the foundation down that we have a police force, and that was important to us. And the same idea could be extended to any municipality. If they have an interest in having officers in schools, they could do an interlocal agreement with us and place their officers in our schools like they do, at least that I'm aware of, is at Pinecrest, Cutler Bay, Palmetto Bay. And those are armed officers who have the legal right to be there. So having said that, let me share with you my fear. My fear is that this bill, Senate Bill 968, and its companion, which is House Bill, I do not have that in front of me. I apologize. It's here somewhere. That bill authorizes the principal and the superintendent to identify those employees in their schools that meet certain criteria. And those criteria are listed in the bill, and they're very clear. It says that the person should be a military veteran who is honorably discharged. It could be an active duty member of the military. It could be a law enforcement officer or a former law enforcement officer. They must have a valid permit, and they must pass training by the Department of Law Enforcement, as well as any additional screening as required by the school principal or superintendent. Okay, so here we have an item that talks about allowing to have a law enforcement officer in the school. If a district or a municipality wants to have a law enforcement officer in the school, they do not need to put in an employee of the school system. If you're teaching class, or you're a custodian, or you're a cafeteria worker, or a secretary, or anyone in that building, an AP, and you are one of these folks identified by a principal or the superintendent to carry a concealed weapon, I really don't think that this is what our schools want to become. I don't think our employees want to become law enforcement officers, because if they do, they have a direct line to become a law enforcement officer and be placed in a school. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are listening, the question is not, well, it would help our kids and would keep them safe. No. The real question is, what if? Okay, we have what if there is a hurricane, we have insurance. What if there is an accident in our car, we have insurance. What if we catch, do we have any way, what if we have a disease, we can get insurance. My what if is, what if that person in that school who is carrying a weapon that is concealed has a really bad day, either from previous history or just, you know what, got ticked off. And we have sometimes those issues. We have in front of us where teachers have gotten into altercations with students. What if that happens to be one of the people who are allowed to carry a gun? Are we going to want to sit here and look in the mirror and say, gee, it was really worth that one item? It was really worth having a person who is not a police officer in that school carrying a concealed weapon. And what if that person forgets that the weapon is in their drawer and puts it in when they have lunch and someone goes and gets it? There are too many what-ifs, and I do not want to be part of a system that may have a liability issue, a negligence issue, or a what-if we lose a child issue. This is very clear to me. There are ways that the system, that the public can and the other districts and municipalities can put a legal person in there. We do not need to have our employees, regardless of what their background was, carrying a weapon that is concealed, that may be taken from them, that may be used inappropriately, that could lead to a death in our school. We are teachers. We are in education. We are not safety people. That's why we have the school police. I really hope that I have the support, the unified support of this board on asking the superintendent to very simply, if you approve this resolution, to ask him to notify our Miami-Dade County, Dade delegation that we are in opposition of these items. So I leave it for that. Thank you for listening.
Ms. Regalado? Is she here? No. There's no other comments on this item? Dr. Paris?
No, I would love to have had more time to talk about this because there's so many aspects of it, and you want to do what is right, and you always question, would this action have saved a life when you hear about some of the horrors that have happened in schools? It's talk about the cursive writing, talk about the new world, that it's so unfortunate that we even have to have a discussion like this. But I think, given what I sometimes see happen at schools, where you see people come in and have such strange expectations about what their rights are in schools, and how difficult it is already for our principals, who are the ones who control the school, the actual spaces in the schools. It seems to me that there needs to be more discussion or more talk about how we can ensure more safety for our students. So I would tend to, if I'm going to err, I would err on the side of supporting my colleague on this, because there are just too many variables that are unknown, and I've seen too many people with expectations about what they can do in schools based on what they know what they've seen somebody else do, that it really could be very scary. So I even though I wish we would have a workshop and a discussion to hear statistics and things of that nature, to be better informed about this, I think it would be prudent to err on the side of approving this as Dr. Feldman has brought it forth. Thank you.
I have Dr. Holloway as well as Dr. Karp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in favor of the resolution. I would encourage the sponsor of the resolution to find out and add in the subject the House bill number, so that there will not be doubt as to what our posture is as it relates to both bills as it goes forward. And as soon as we have that in there, to have complete title, so that if one or the other is passed and moves on, we want to make sure that it has been expressed by us.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. That's a great idea. And Before I call on Dr. Ms. Mendez-Cartaya, I know what I read in the newspaper. It passed in a Senate committee, right?
Yes, ma'am. Senate Bill 968 passed criminal justice on Monday, and actually the House companion, House Bill 753, passed just today in a committee, in its first committee of reference, and the vote basically came down party line, 9-4 vote.
But it passed.
Yes, ma'am. That committee, again, it has in the House 2 additional stops, and in the Senate it has 3 additional stops.
So I assume it has traction by what you're saying.
It has more traction than it did last year. Last year, this bill only had 1 hearing in the Florida House. The Senate never took up the issue.
Then, Madam Chair, I would like to offer an amendment that we add House Bill number 753 to this resolution's title, and I'm in support of the resolution as presented.
Yes, let me call Dr. Karp and then Dr. Benders-Mendigoman, please. Dr. Karp, sir?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We didn't have the benefit of this discussion in committee, and I know that there's some urgency in the terms of we're being in the middle of legislative session, so I understand that. But when we do have those opportunities, whether it's a workshop, as Dr. Perez stated, or committee, there are more opportunities to be able to get some questions answered and to do a little more research. I guess one of the comments that I would make is that not every school has an armed person, and we know that that's a fact, and that we had talked about, and I'm not making the connection, but since we did talk about CPR earlier, in every school, not everybody is, let's say, a full-time nurse, yet there are people who are designated that in their part-time with training can actually perform CPR. I guess one of the questions that I have is who is this up to? Is this a county by county based on what the Senate bill and the House bill contains? Is this a county by county decision that each superintendent would make, determining whether school sites would have such individuals, or is this statewide? So if I may, let me see if I can just get an answer to that question first. Is this a county by county? Who is this up to?
Through the chair, it is basically up to the school board policy to allow a policy that the board would have to create, and then the principal and the superintendent would make those decisions as to the principal who in the school site would have that concealed weapon, as long as they've met those criteria stipulated in state statutes.
The answer is county by county. Is that what I think I understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
So each county would have the ability to, if I may, through the chair, would have the ability to formulate a policy by district based on what the superintendent and staff determines.
Through the chair, correct.
I again, in mentioning my previous analogy and with the CPR, and I know that the comment was made earlier when the item was brought forward that our employees would not feel comfortable, or I don't remember the exact wording, but I don't know that we've asked our employees or that we've had that conversation. I know that the state teachers union has taken a position, but I haven't heard the position of individual teachers or whether we've asked our employees. I just think that I would need a little more time for discussion before I would support this resolution. But I'm going to hear more conversation from my colleagues first. Thank you.
Dr. Benders-Mendigoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a little bit confused. May I ask a question of staff?
Of course, ma'am.
Mrs. Mendez-Cartaya. Is this a member's bill or committee's bill or another source?
Through the chair, this is a member bill. In the Senate, it is being carried by Senator Hayes, and in the House, it's Representative Stubbe.
One follow-up, Madam Chair. Yes, ma'am. And you did say to us that the votes came down by party line?
Through the chair, the votes have come down party line.
Okay. One more, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
Hearing that we could do policy and make decisions county by county, well, the state statute, once the bill has passed, and are we accountable to that in any way, or once it's passed, then we can look at it and carve out our own policy?
Through the chair, should this legislation be passed, it would be up to the local board to take a position through a recommendation of the local superintendent on this piece of legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. But, Ms. Mendez-Cartaya, I believe it's a voluntary to the district to adopt a policy, right?
Correct.
It's voluntary.
It's voluntary.
Thank you. Ms. Castillo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, along with those lines, Ms. Cataya, so that would mean if this would pass, it would be up to our school district whether we would allow guns, or our staff with a gun in any of our schools.
Through the chair, correct. It would be the local school board's decision through the enactment of local policy, school board policy.
Well, I'm glad to hear that at least we would have that authority, but I still would like to go ahead and support the item that Dr. Feldman has presented. It scares me to think that we would have a loaded gun in any of our schools, whether it's with people that are not that are not really trained professionals like the chief and the staff, the school system. So I'm total support of the item. Thank you, Dr. Feldman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mendez-Cartaya, and I know this may be a question that you don't have the answer. Do we know how other districts have reacted to it?
Through the other school districts, there is wide opposition to this legislation. Florida School Board Association spoke in opposition. The Superintendent's Association is in opposition. Florida PTA is in opposition to this legislation. So the school districts do not favor this. Do not favor this.
Well, I guess if it's voluntary and if the school district don't want to adopt it or are against it, actually will not happen, right? Or I'm not understanding the way.
It's ultimately the board's position whether they adopt legislation to allow this type of behavior in our local schools. There's also a provision that basically says that there could be guns in people's vehicles should the board again allow for that kind of policy. So again, I think that you'll see some more opening of or more flexibility in this area should this legislation pass.
You mean people like teachers, administrators, or students? What are we talking about?
So anyone that may have a license to carry a gun.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Yes, Dr. Karp, sir?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. So as I asked earlier, and what it seems to me is that no one is forcing anything on us. And even when I was reading the editorial this morning in the Herald, in the back page, a question was asked, would teachers with relatively minimal training be capable of such discipline? I just think that there's this confusion, even there from the board, the editorial board, of what this is really all about. And given the confusion and the lack of information, we haven't even had the opportunity, because it didn't go through committee, to hear from our chief of police. Okay. There's some missing pieces for me, and that's why I have concern supporting state legislation. Senate and House bills are being opposed to it when no one's forcing anything on us, and we haven't had a full discussion.
But, Dr. Karp, I understand your point, and I agree with your point. Now, we cannot discuss this unless it's a public meeting. We don't have a board meeting until for another month. Unless we choose to have a special workshop or something, we will not, even at a workshop, we cannot take action. My question to you, Ms. Mendez-Cartaya, that are an expert in this, what happens if we don't do anything now and then the bill really becomes law? I know it's voluntary. I know what I have understood today. What happens?
Madam Chair, you're absolutely correct. There is only one school board meeting between now and the end of the legislative session, which is scheduled to conclude May 2nd. So in order for staff to have direction on this issue, if the board sees that fit to take a position.
Yeah,
on the
that's
issue.
what I thought. Yeah, Mr. Curbelo, sir, and I think Dr. Holloway wants to speak again. Yes, Mr. Curbelo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's clear that there are concerns about this bill, and obviously very legitimate concerns about the idea of guns in schools. And, of course, I share those concerns. However, I agree with what Dr. Karp is saying, that there are a lot of details that at least I haven't had the opportunity to get into and to become more familiar with. So I don't know if perhaps a middle ground is for Ms. Mendez-Cartaya to convey the fact that clearly, and this is a public meeting and everything's on the record, that there are concerns from the board that we aren't really sure if this is a good idea to introduce guns into schools, that we want to learn more. But until we get more details about this law, I would rather wait to take a formal position on it. And I do remember a few years ago, we had kind of decided informally up here that we wouldn't be voting on every single bill that is being considered in Tallahassee. And I do think it's not a dangerous precedent, because it's certainly not, there's nothing dangerous about it, but this surely invites each one of us that has a concern about any bill in Tallahassee to bring it to the board, and we can have a mini legislature here, which I don't think would be too productive. So I don't know if that is, and I'm very respectful of the vice chair, and I think he's bringing this forward with wonderful intentions and legitimate concerns that I think everyone up here shares. But I was wondering if it would be a good middle ground or compromise to ask, unless someone has an objection here, for Ms. Mendez-Cartaya to take these concerns with her to Tallahassee and maybe report back at the next committee meeting. And if there's an urgent need to take a formal position, it could be done at that time before the end of the legislative session.
Dr. Holloway, sir?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sometimes as responsible adults, we have to make some decisions. And I think with the information we have provided, with the information that we have from educational facilities having had instances of guns and gun violence across our country, we can sit and debate, but if we've got to make a decision, let's make a decision and move forward. As my colleague said, if we're going to err on the side of whatever judgment we come up with as we're looking at this right now, and my judgment is against this legislation that's moving through the chambers. And while it's moving at a partisan rate, we recognize that the legislature is controlled by partisan politics. So what is right or what you feel is right is sometimes what you need to speak on. And I think it's time we stop, we make our decision and move forward. While we're not debating as they're doing in the legislature, I think we have enough information. I applaud my colleague for bringing this to us as a resolution from our board regarding this particular issue in our schools. So, again, I'm in favor of the resolution as presented.
Dr. Perez?
Madam Chair, I spoke before, but I'm going to speak as a result of what Mr. Corbello said, which he reminded me that we should try not to be either supportive or condemning of bills in Tallahassee, because those kinds of things become very partisan, and that is not what we're about. And when we start to do things like that, which I think this is like the second time that we're being asked to do it, it can be divisive and maybe not in the best interest of the students and of the school district. And again, I really don't know sufficiently. I don't know if there's been any research on this. I would just love to have had an opportunity to discuss this and to hear about it. I understand why Dr. Feldman is bringing it, and I certainly respect some of the people that are opposed to it. And that is why I'm saying that because of the respect that I have for the people that have, voiced opinion and the severity of it, I would tend to acquiesce and vote along with my colleague. But I hope that this is not something that we continue to do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you feel like Dr. Holloway? Now, Dr. Feldman, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I so respectfully have listened to everyone, and I understand where everyone is, I think I do anyway, on their positions. And there are just a few things that I think I need to just reiterate. The intent of the legislation, I'm reading directly from the bill, is to prevent violent crimes from occurring on school grounds. That just seems like almost like an oxymoron, saying I want to have less violence, but as we know in our communities, certainly people carrying guns are not going to stop the violent crimes. People are going to be afraid to send their child to school because they don't know what's going to happen by even maybe a teacher, or not a teacher, by an employee that may not be fully there. And that happens. We have that all the time in terms of people not making the best judgments. I mean, we see this many times during personnel issues that come in front of us that the superintendent requests that we look into dismissing them, and maybe it says that they punched a kid. We had one of those. Hit a kid, had one of those. What if that happens to be the person who's carrying the concealed weapon? And if I can, I'm just very afraid about my kid sitting there, your kid sitting there. So number one, I certainly accept Dr. Holloway's friendly amendment to include House Bill 753 in the title. Number two, the intent does not meet my goal, and I hope yours too, of being an educator and a school board member looking out for all children under our care. Number three, the principal, it says directly in the bill that the principal or the superintendent may appoint one or more designees. I don't know who's going to be done like that. Number three, it includes preschool. Can't wait to see some preschool teachers that may or may not be certified teachers carrying concealed weapons and having a little kid in that same problem in preschool. Concealed weapons, ladies and gentlemen, if you think this is going to be a good thing, I'm sharing with you it's going to be very difficult for someone who has a concealed weapons permit not to have it in their car while they're parked at your school. Number 4, ladies and gentlemen, we already have a policy. This board has not tampered with what the board has done before, which is to outlaw all firearms by personnel within the school, within property of the school, within your cars, within the fenced-in area. If you wanted to have that taken away, you could do it on your own. You can put an item tomorrow and say, you know what, I think we should have guns in the school, and let's go ahead and point somebody to have that gun. But you don't. You have kept it because you know in your hearts that one accident is not worth what you're going to be doing. Number 5, Florida School Board Association looks out for 67 counties. They were against it. The Superintendent's Association, 67 counties were against it. The police were against it. The PTA were against it. Parent groups and the State Teachers Union. I don't know that we've had that many people and that many organizations against one thing in a long time, all on the same unified place. Last one is this, and I really hope that this makes a difference. Our children don't have parties unless they're alive to have a party. I really hope that you support this unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have Mr. Corbella, Ms. Castillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to understand my colleague. So our district has a very clear policy, and no one here has ever proposed changing it to the extent of my knowledge. We are responsible for our district and for no other district in the state. We've spoken clearly here through the policy that was established and the fact that it's never been challenged at all. So I share your concerns, and I agree with you. I really have major questions about this idea of introducing guns in schools. I think it could have terrible unintended consequences. What I don't know if it's prudent is to wade into a statewide issue when we have already taken ownership for our school system and spoken clearly with regards to our school system. So again, I think it's wonderful that all of us have our opinions about what the legislature's going to do or not going to do, not only on this issue, but on many others. I just question whether it's necessary to go through this exercise. And again, we had this conversation on the dais perhaps a couple years ago I brought a resolution regarding some law. I forget what it was at the time, and then other people brought their resolutions, and I remember Dr. Karp was one of the first that raised this issue. Is it prudent? Does it make sense for us to vote on individual bills being presented in Tallahassee? We have a legislative agenda. I think that is our vehicle for empowering Ms. Mendez-Cartaya and her team. I just question whether this is necessary at this time. And I don't appreciate the framing of, well, if you vote against this, then you're in favor of introducing guns in schools. That's Hobson's choice. That's unfair. My dear Vice Chair, even though I think you have wonderful intentions, I share your very legitimate concerns. I don't think it's prudent to move forward with this item, and I can't support it.
Ms. Castillo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Listening to everyone, and I understand the points that were made by two of our board members about making this a political issue, but
do you mind speaking on the mic so I can understand?
Sorry, about that this could be a political issue because this is legislation and it's being done in Tallahassee, and then we shouldn't maybe take a position as a board. But I just see this as such an important topic. Security in our schools, I think, is above everything else that we need to really be discussing and we need to take a position on. And I really would like to hear from the experts in the field from our chief of police or from our superintendent as to how they feel about this legislation that's being proposed. If I can ask for that.
Thank you. Of course you can. I was going to do the same thing, ask the chief to speak on this, but I wanted the board members to finish speaking. Are we all done? I want to ask Chief Moffett, because it's confusing. Let me tell you first, I certainly accepted the good cause item because it was very worthwhile. I feel very strongly about the issue. I'm very concerned about the issue. And I think this is something that it may not pass. It may pass a committee, but ultimately it may not become law because there might too much opposition to it. And many things in Tallahassee pass committees and then nothing happens at the end. Having said that, and obviously the item is here because I approve it because I believe in the item. But I want to hear more because I have some doubts after I hear other board members express their concerns. Mr. Chief Moffett, please, sir.
Through the chair. I personally do not support this bill. I think it's an officer safety issue regarding introducing of weapons, concealed weapons inside of our schools. Our local police chiefs, the Miami-Dade Chiefs Association, they also do not support this. We discussed this in our business meeting. National organizations, chiefs across this country do not support legislation like this because of the fact of we're introducing weapons to people who, based on a variety of areas, are not going to be well-equipped, well-trained, continual trained, along with who are going to maintain this, who are going to oversee this. There's a wide variety of issues that concerns us about this. At the end of the day, we don't believe introducing more guns to civilians is the way to protect our schools. So chiefs across this country, the people I've spoken through, the Chiefs Association here locally, do not support this bill.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Mr. Corbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chief, obviously you know you have the support of this board because that is our policy.
Right.
And that is the point I'm trying to make here. This is not a decision that we're making up here whether to support your position or not. We clearly do. That is the policy of this board, and no one up here is proposing any changes to it, and that's for a reason. So I don't, I reject framing this discussion that we're having up here on this item in that way. This is, I think the decision we have to make is, do we want to be, continuously making official pronouncements as a board on every bill that's introduced in Tallahassee or on certain bills that are introduced in Tallahassee. We had decided a couple years ago informally, not through any board rule, but I think everyone, perhaps except Ms. Castillo, was here that we would not do this. I remember now that Ms. Regalado was here, she even brought some items as I did, and we were told, well, this is probably not a good idea. So I just want us to be consistent while repeating again, there are very legitimate concerns with the legislation that's being proposed. This board has a policy. It's clearly been enforced, and it's been our policy for many years. And that's not what we're discussing up here. So I just want to keep making that clear.
Thank you, Mr. Corbello. Ms. Regalado, you're back.
I'm back. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was listening to part of the discussion upstairs. I just wanted to put in my 2 cents. I've been very vocal about this. I'm against this bill. I was against it last session. We talked about it last session, and it's a shame that we have to use the little political power that we have in Tallahassee to prevent this kind of stuff. It's especially a shame to see it this session after everything that this board has done to talk about school safety and security. And I must give credit to the superintendent. I was present for all the meetings that we've had with all the mayors, with all the police chiefs. I also have to say that on the facility side, how many times have we talked to Jamie about safety, about cameras? We just rolled out Wi-Fi for all of our schools, which allows us to buy cameras at a much, much cheaper price and to do better when it comes to security. The chief has talked about centralization of that video for safety reasons. I think you would be hard-pressed to find any district in the state of Florida that has talked more about student safety since Sandy Hook than Miami-Dade County Public Schools. So the fact that you sit and you listen to these committees in Tallahassee and you hear them talk about how districts haven't done anything and how districts do not make this a priority, I'm going to have to, and I totally understand what Board Member Corbello is saying, and he's right. I was chastised many a times my first 2 years here for bringing bills, supporting legislation. But I think in this particular instance, there is a lot of miscommunication, and there is a lot of misinformation that is being promulgated in Tallahassee about what districts are doing, about the priorities of this district in particular, which has made student safety not just, a priority as of late, but really a driver in a lot of the conversations that we're having, and something that we are constantly talking to our residents about. So I think it's important to consider that, to consider the misinformation piece, and especially since one of our own, Representative Manny Diaz voted for this, having been told, several times what our position is. So even though it's part of our legislative platform, when you have members of our own delegation that are, in favor of this, despite as many times as you told them how this should not be a priority for them and what we're doing in Miami-Dade County Schools. I think that at that point, when you have that level of tone deafness in Tallahassee, you should break the rules a little bit and send a message. And so I commend my fellow board member, Larry Feldman. And I want to say, Larry, I'm a Republican. I'm all for certain Republican ideals, and I don't think that this is partisan in any way. This has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. I've been very clear about that. Obviously, this is in Tallahassee part of a broader NRA initiative, which I have no issue with if it was something that was necessary in our school districts, and I don't think it is. I think everyone has been very forward-thinking and very proactive when it comes to security, and my concern is that parents that are reading about this think that we need to arm our teachers because obviously Miami-Dade County Public Schools isn't doing anything, and that is not the message that we need to send. And I just wanted to ask one question about the cost, because again, the misinformation is what really gets me in these committees. One of the things they're saying is that this is not going to cost anything, and we talked about this last year, and we were very clear that this could cost us money. We have lots of different schools. We have insurance policies that Dr. Hines will tell you, cost us a fortune for our properties. My concern is, what is the liability going to be, and do we have any idea of what that cost is? I mean, I know that on several occasions, Dr. Hines tells us about how Lloyd's of London is the only one that will insure us. I can't imagine what will happen when teachers are packing heat, what Lloyd's of London is going to charge us. But as an attorney, I'm concerned about the liability, because Tallahassee will pass a bill and provide our teachers and employees with the opportunity to pack heat, but then at the same time, they'll also approve all the claims bills that we'll have to deal with when we have to pay for, as we say in Spanish, the broken plates, right? So I just wanted to know if there was any information regarding the cost of this. We obviously have talked about the concern of our police, the concern that all the police officers have. So Dr. Hines, on the insurance side, are we going to have to become self-insured when it comes to property?
We are self-insured with regard to property. So effectively, if we had liability suits against us, it hits the general fund immediately.
Exactly. Thank you, Dr. Hines. And that's one of my concerns. And I think that's something that I know that our staff communicated to our representatives in Tallahassee. Also, we told them about this last year when it came up. But everyone talks about how every single one of our dollars should go to education, and we do everything to ensure that as much of that happens. But the idea of opening up opening us up to a liability that is going to come out of the general fund just because Tallahassee thinks that this is a good topic for an election year, I think is egregious at best. And thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Regalado. Let me ask a question to the attorney, if I may. Mr. Harvey, we have a policy in place, right?
Yes.
The policy in place, does it not give orders to our legislative team to do just that? I mean, this is a question, really.
Yes, through the chair, if I'm understanding your question correctly, yes, the board can order staff to take certain directions based on what's in the policies. And currently in the policy, we have a zero tolerance policy for concealed weapons on not only school property, but also any property that's controlled by the school. So you can give direction to staff in that regard.
That was not necessarily the question. The question was, if it's already a policy that we have in place, isn't that a direction already to our staff, to our legislative team?
Yes, madam. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Curbelo, I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I really appreciate this conversation. And the reason I just asked you to not, recognize me first was I just don't want the conversation cut off.
I'm sorry.
No, you did fine. I don't want any question called while we're still talking about this. It's kind of like what I've watched this in the past. Let's get back to the point. What is the point? The point is safety. There's no other point. This is not about politics. This is not about partisanship. This is not about the NRA. This is not about anything else. This is not about whether or not we've supported bills in the past. It's not about whether or not we have, and I would love to see the research on this because I know that several of us have put in items supporting legislation last legislative session. And that's okay. We're asked to support international terror. We're asked to support our children that don't even live in our country right now because it's okay. We look out for children in Venezuela. We look out for children in Nigeria who are being forced into schools and then burned alive. That's not Dade County Public Schools. This is about all children, ladies and gentlemen. This is about your child because this is not just public school. This is your private school. It happens there, too. It says non-private. And I apologize for getting extremely sensitive about this. I am not willing to take a chance of having to go to a kid's funeral because somebody in our school was given permission to carry a gun. That's the only issue here. Do you, in fact, agree that it's going to be okay for an employee to carry a gun the way it's written now? Or do you not agree? I remember that we had an item before that said we're going to not support something unless it was changed, right? We had an item that we did that last year. This particular item, if you want to say that this school board goes on record in opposition to House Bill 573 and 968, I would be a very happy camper, a parent. I'd be happy to know that I'm a board member. I'd be happy to know that I'm looking out for kids. I cannot wave off of that one piece. This is not about anything else other than one piece. Do you want employees in your school or any school system in the state of Florida carrying a weapon in school that is concealed or in their car? I just can't give in on that, my friends. I just cannot. And as many rationales as you're going to have, I cannot accept a rationale that would exempt me from saying, oh, yes, I will, in fact, vote to let's have it done because I think I don't want to interfere with politicians in Tallahassee. There are no rationalizations for me. I will vote to support this. I accept T's friendly amendment. The message that it sends is quite simply this. We're here to educate you, not to implement guns in schools. So go ahead and I hope that, can I call the question?
No, let Mr. Curbelo had his hand raised and I let you speak first. So let me just be fair to all of you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's so unfortunate to frame this in a way that's, if you vote against this, someone's going to end up at a child's funeral. I actually think that's fairly tasteless, in my opinion. And I want to get to the point, because my colleague said he was going to get to the point. So I want to ask Ms. Mendez-Cartaya a question. If this law were to pass, which I'm not sure if it will or not, nobody knows, will it change our policy in Miami-Dade County Public Schools in any way?
Through the chair, the board would have to take a position to modify its rules.
Has the board already taken a position on guns in our schools?
Through the chair, the board's current policy provides a no tolerance, no guns on school grounds.
Does this law in any way change, does the passage of this law, and if you don't feel comfortable answering, maybe the attorney can answer it, does the passage of this law force a policy change in our district in any way?
I defer to
the attorney better, yeah. Mr. Harvey?
Yes, through the chair, the current policy again is no concealed weapons on school-owned property or school-controlled property. That policy remains in effect unless this board takes action to change that policy.
Okay, that's an important point, because if this law were to change our policy, I would be just adamantly opposed to it, and I think we would urgently need to vote on this matter. So given the fact that we've established here that passage of this law in no way changes our policy, and that this board will keep its policy against having guns in our schools, then I have one more question for Ms. Mendez-Cartaya, and you have a unique perspective on this because you walk the halls of Tallahassee for us every week. Given that this law will not change our policy or force any change in our policy, do you consider this a good investment of the board's political capital? I told her I was going to put her on the spot. I don't think you should answer. Yeah. She shouldn't answer it. She gets paid to do this. She shouldn't answer that question.
Mr. Curbelo, please. Dr. Feldman, through the chair, please. I have Dr. Karp had first raised his hand, Ms. Regalado, and Dr. Holloway.
First of all, I would like to thank the Chief for explaining very clearly your position and the position of those at the state and national levels. I think that's very helpful. Hadn't heard from you on that, and because there really wasn't an opportunity. So, again, I think your insight from a professional expertise is certainly helpful to me. Again, I know that respectfully the Vice Chair has framed this as a very straightforward question. I do feel very strongly about safety. I have children who are of my own who are currently, well, maybe they're out right now, hopefully, unless they got a detention, but I don't think so. But children who are in their desks here in the school district. And again, I just see that unless I hear differently, that local government decides local issues. I think that's the question as I view this whole thing, that we as a local school board have the opportunity to decide or to determine which direction we're going to go in. And until I hear anything differently, then I don't see I just don't see supporting bills or not supporting bills. We've talked about Tallahassee also dictating to us how we should do things and sponsoring legislation that determines how we should make appointments and do other things. I've seen that in the past. This goes the other direction. And then the final piece that I have to reiterate, because it's never been discussed, I'll ask the Chief this question, if I may, through the chair. I'll wait a moment. Chief, if I may. Does every school have one person with a weapon at each of our school sites?
Through the chair, right now we have officers assigned to high schools and middle schools and K-8 centers, and we're working on putting them in the K-8 centers, along with our local partners that are available to respond. We're working with several different agencies with MOUs. The City of Miami working on an MOU right now. So we're working towards that, but mostly our secondary schools have police officers who are sworn and trained and armed to respond and deal daily out there on the campus.
Okay, but the answer is no, right now.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Regalado and then Dr. Holloway.
Thank you. And just a point of clarification, and I hate to get all attorney on everyone, but just to explain the point that Walter made, because I think it's important. The passage of this law legally does not change our policy. However, it does entitle any employee of Miami-Dade County Schools to call upon that Florida law and say that it is their right to bring a gun to school. Now, obviously, the change to our policy, if we do not make it, would come through litigation as we fight our policy against the state supremacy. And that's why this is about local control. So while I don't want people to think that Tallahassee passes laws and we have so much local control as constitutional officers that, hey, if we have a policy, then it's okay. I wish that was the fact. Quite the opposite. We have to pass policy, and then if they decide to take action, then it has to go to court as we try to figure out who has supremacy, because unfortunately we do not have supremacy over rights that are created at the state level. So it would be very difficult for us legally to prevent an employee who wanted to bring a gun to school should there be state action that empowers them to do that. And that's the concern. And again, you know, if this was something that our police officers thought was important, if this was something that chiefs around the state thought that was a good idea, if someone could stand up and say that there was a need for this and that this is something that would be beneficial to our school district and our children, then I would gladly stand down and say that it is within the purview of the state to act if the school districts are not acting. My issue with that is that this school district is acting, that this would only provide us with liability, that I have yet to encounter a parent that wants their teacher carrying a gun, and that chances are the school district that will end up in court over this issue is going to be the largest school district in Florida, the school district that has 50,000 employees, of which only one has to decide that they want to take a gun to work, and then we have to go to court and figure that out. So I want to make sure that no one thinks that this is something that happens in a vacuum and that something can happen in Tallahassee and that it will not have an impact on us, because that's not the case. And Walter, if you can explain that second part of what happens when someone wakes up one morning and decides they want to take a concealed permit to school, it would be helpful.
I just want to clarify on that point, Madam Chair.
Okay, because I have other speakers,
briefly.
yeah.
I need to take advice from our school board attorney, with all respect, Ms. Regalado, and I want to ask him, does this law explicitly allow each school board to make the decision regarding its policy, or does it open the school board to a challenge? Is this explicitly addressed in the bill?
Yes, through the chair, my understanding, the bill as presently written is to delegate that authority to the school boards to determine whether they should have a policy to allow non-law enforcement personnel to come on campus with concealed weapons. And then they would, of course, through the policy, designate that authority to school site administrators and the superintendent. But that would have to be done through a policy at the county level.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have to take our attorney's opinion that this would not lead to a supremacy issue, since explicitly it is addressed in the law that school boards have the final say on gun policies.
No, but we have to allow other board members, if it's quick, in response to that, because I need to allow other board members to speak.
Thank you. And it's just that Walter didn't respond to my question, and I understand Mr. Corbello's point. But Walter, here's the question again. Despite what the law as it is presently says, if an employee of Miami-Dade County Schools, after this law is passed, hypothetically, wants to bring a gun to school, can they take us to court and use this state law as a means to state that they have that right.
Mr. Harvey, sir?
Yes, through the chair. Currently, what we would do as a school district, we would seek to enforce our policy. So we would simply move against that employee for violating our policy, which would mean discipline. And it also, obviously, a student, if it's an adult student or a student of majority age that can carry a concealed weapon. What I think that what we would not have is any authority beyond our school policy to discipline an employee or a student. But as far as the supremacy clause, that's not as much of a concern as just simply having the authority of our policy to discipline students and employees. Beyond that, there is no authority to sanction an employee for bringing a gun on campus.
Can you explain that in layman's terms? Because I know exactly what you're saying, but I don't think other people do. But just so that you can, I know exactly what you're saying, but just try again, so that everyone understands. And then,
yes, through the chair. For example, if an employee brings a gun on campus, there may be certain rights of action, maybe even criminal enforcement for bringing a concealed weapon on campus through zero tolerance. If this bill were to pass, then obviously the only mechanism we would have as a school district is to discipline them through our policy. And our policy is very clear in at least 5 or 6 different places that, guns are not allowed on campus.
but can they appeal that, and do they have a case, which is my point? Does this law help them?
Through the chair, just through employee discipline matters, they would. I feel pretty comfortable we could sustain a discipline against an employee or a student who would appeal our determination that they violated our policies. But beyond that, there's no authority beyond that.
I think we need to expedite this, because if not, we will be here all night. I think I had Ms. Castillo, Dr. Perez, Dr. Holloway. Did I see you wanted to speak again, sir? I'm sorry, sir. Would you like to speak now, sir?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought the question directed to the attorney was, should this law pass, will we be directed to address our policy? And I think the answer is yes. And that is where I have the concern. We would have to address our current policy, is what I see.
Yes.
To assume that you were not in agreement with something.
No, through the chair, if the bill passes, there's no requirement that we change our current policy.
Not change, address that policy, which is different. We would have to look at it, and we would have to make a decision regarding what it states right now.
Through the chair, the board may address its policy at that point, but it's not required.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
There he goes with legal stuff. May. If this bill passes, we would be required to address our policy.
We have to take the attorney's interpretation. I think the attorney's interpretation. Do you mind one more time make it clear, Mr. Harvey, so we can move on, please? I'm sorry, sir.
Yes, through the chair, the board is not required to change its current policy if this bill passes.
Again, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I am not saying change. I am saying address. Whatever our policy is, we would have to look at it as it relates to, we would need to address it as it relates to this new law that is on the books that allows the opportunity for anyone with a gun to have its possession on our premises.
Well, I think like we do in other instances too, we have to do that. Let me call Ms. Castillo, that's been very patient. No? Dr. Paris?
Thank you. This is part of my particular frustration, is that we have something that is a big unknown. We don't know. We don't know if they're going to require that we take a look at, address, or leave it as it is. We don't know. We really have. We really don't know what is entailed in this, and this is probably not even going to pass, as we've heard. So the takeaway for me, anyway, is that even though I understand Dr. Feldman and how passionate he is about this, that it's a bad idea whenever there are bills, because we all have issues and we all have friends in Tallahassee, and we all want to support our friends, and I just see that this is not this discussion should edify us of the fact that this is probably not a good idea to bring a bill, especially one that hasn't been discussed at a committee or at a workshop. And as I say, I will be voting with Dr. Feldman, but I also see the discussion by some of the other board members who have brought objections as extremely legitimate objections that we as a board should also consider. So thank you, Madam Chair.
I think we discussed. Do you want to say something more, sir? Yes.
Just one last point, and I think it's very important that no matter what each of our individual positions or opinions is on this issue, we cannot abandon the facts or twist them. So I'll be very clear about the opinion that we have received from our attorney and that I have gathered from the text of the legislation, which I have now reviewed. If this bill were to pass, which is by no means certain, there would be zero action required from this board. Not changing, not addressing, looking at policies, whatever that means. We can look at policies all the time. I don't even know what that means. But zero action is required from this board. We would be able to keep the policy that we have, which is the policy I support.
Dr. Karp, we're missing board members. We would be missing board members.
Thank you.
No, I don't mean. Yeah, we're going to
Madam
call
Chair, this is just a brief question for the
yes,
attorney.
Yes, sir, Dr. Karp, and then I'm going to call the question.
Okay, thanks. What I think board members Regalado and Curbelo referred to in the past, but if my experience has been that also bills change and can be dramatically different from this point early on in the legislative session to later on or at the conclusion. So the question for the attorney is, let's say we supported this resolution to oppose these bills, and then these bills changed. Do we then come back and address a new resolution at the April 9th board meeting, which is still well within the legislative session? Is that something that we're required to do or something that we can do? But I guess the first question is am I correct that bills can be quite different as session moves on? Let me just get one answer to that and then answer.
Yes, Ms. Mendez-Cartaya.
Through the chair, bills change more times than we would like them to change in some cases. So they change all the time, yes.
So the final question then for me, Madam Chair, was to the attorney. If we vote on this item in support of opposition and the bills change, we could then come back and vote again in April on maybe what a different bill or the same bill looks like at that point.
Yes, through the chair, if an item is presented to the board at that time and through a proper motion, the board can consider it at the April meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I need to vote on the item. All those in favor of H20 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Call for a roll call vote.
Well, why don't we raise our hands?
Sorry. Madam
You want name?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. There was also a motion to amend the item to add the House bill reference.
I need a motion on the amendment to the recommend, which is, I think, the only amendment was to add the Senate bill and the House bill, right? Number? Is that what we're talking about? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. All those in favor of agenda item as amendment H20 signify by saying aye.
Madam Chair.
All those opposed?
Madam Chair.
There's 2 noes. 1 no?
I'm sorry. I had another question.
You vote no?
No, I wanted to ask a question. I'd like to hear from the superintendent, if that's... Well, we haven't heard from the superintendent. I would like to know what his opinion is as far as bringing an item like this to the board.
Well, I think we could have asked him before, but I am going to go the extra mile to do that. But I don't think the superintendent, it's not his decision. We've asked staff plenty. We've talked about this extensively. I think how we all feel about it. I think I think we all feel, at least I can only speak for myself, but from what I heard from all of you, we're totally in favor of the situation because of safety. You know, my life in the school board for many years have been safety in our schools in many different fashions. And this, to me, at the present time, it's about safety, too. And whether it passes or doesn't pass, I could not bear just voting against something that would, in some way, in some fashion, hurt our children. So I have to support the item. Yes, you want to ask the superintendent? You certainly can.
Really, my question is whether the superintendent would ever bring a recommendation to change the policy on this.
To change what?
Policy.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I could not understand what you said. You said to change policy?
If there's something that the superintendent would bring to recommend to change policy on, I'd like to hear what his opinion is.
Okay. Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this party.
I know you're not happy, but...
It's not the best party? No. Wait until you have to discuss that bill that now allows kids in cafeterias to have Pop-Tarts that look like guns. That may be a very important bill to be discussed. If the question is, would I ever bring, because I read the bill and I understand the context of the bill. If the question is, would I ever bring a policy recommendation to this board, because I understand the bill does not mandate a policy change. The bill is permissive to a policy change. And the bill is specific in declaring the superintendent and principal as making a decision on staff members that, if the board approves such policy, to bring concealed weapons to schools. But that would hinge on the existence of a policy. And if you're asking me whether or not I would ever bring a policy recommendation to allow concealed weapons on campuses, my answer is unequivocally, without a doubt, absolutely not.
No. Would you be staying here for the next 100 years?
Thank you, sir. Is that it? So I think the vote, did we vote already, Mr. Harvey? So it passed with 1 no? Is that, Madam Secretary, just to make sure? It passed 8-1. Yes.
Through the chair, the vote was started, but it was not completed.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't hear. The vote started, but what?
The vote was started, and there was 1 no, and you announced that it was 1 no, but you never announced that it was unanimous.
So unless anybody wants to say something different, it was 8-1. Thank you very much. Thank you, board members.